Courtrooms are supposed to be temples of logic, but sometimes the judges forget which religion they practice. 1. The $54 million pants case meet. Judge Roy Pearson, the man who tried to retire on a pair of trousers. Back in 2005, this Washington, D.C. judge dropped off his pants at a local dry cleaner. When they went missing, he didn't ask for a refund or a coupon. No, he sued the owners for $54 million. His legal argument? The sign that said "Satisfaction Guaranteed" was a binding, pants-based constitution. The case dragged on for years, costing the family-owned cleaners thousands just to defend themselves. Pearson even showed up to court in tears, claiming emotional distress over his missing slacks. In the end, he lost, both the case and what remained of his dignity. But hey, thanks to him, judges everywhere got a new rule of thumb. If you lose your pants, maybe just buy another pair instead of trying to fund your retirement on polyester. 2. The man who sued God and almost won. In 2007, Nebraska State Senator Ernie Chambers decided to test the limits of divine accountability by filing an official lawsuit against God. His claim? The Almighty was responsible for fearsome floods, horrendous hurricanes, and widespread terror. The best part? The court actually had to consider it. The case wasn't dismissed because it was absurd. No, it was dismissed because God couldn't be served with legal papers. You know, being omnipresent and all. The court's written decision literally stated they had no valid address for the defendant. So yes, Nebraska technically confirmed that you can sue the Creator, but the case will get stuck in celestial delivery pending. God remains undefeated in court, not by divine power, but because he doesn't check his mail. 3. The man who sued himself. Virginia inmate Robert Lee Brock had a legal epiphany. And by epiphany, I mean the dumbest light bulb moment in history. He filed a $5 million lawsuit against himself, claiming that by getting drunk and committing crimes, he violated his own civil rights. The logic was flawless. In his head. Since he was in prison and unemployed, he argued the state should pay the damages on his behalf, to himself. The judge, maintaining heroic composure, dismissed it with a straight face and called it ingenious but frivolous. To this day, law students study Brock's masterpiece as an example of legal paradox, a man who tried to become his own victim and perpetrator simultaneously. It's like suing your reflection for bad life choices. Entertaining, sure, but not exactly billable hours. 4. The mayor who tried to sue Batman. In 2008, the mayor of a Turkish city called Batman decided that Gotham's Dark Knight had crossed a legal line. His argument? That Warner Brothers and director Christopher Nolan used his city's name without permission in the Dark Knight films, causing, wait for it, psychological distress among residents. Apparently, the people of Batman were emotionally scarred by the sudden association with caped vigilantes and crime. The mayor even claimed the movies had increased local crime rates, as if watching Christian Bale punch clowns somehow inspired real-world chaos in southeastern Turkey. Legal experts didn't know whether to laugh or call for backup. The lawsuit never even made it to court, which is probably for the best, because explaining copyright law to Batman's lawyer would have been its own tragedy. The real takeaway? Somewhere out there is a mayor who tried to sue a billionaire superhero for brand damage. And somewhere else, Bruce Wayne is quietly adding international lawsuit to his long list of enemies, right under Joker and bad press. 5. The psychic who sued NASA for trespassing on Mars. In 1997, a woman named Clarissa Davis filed a $300 million lawsuit against NASA, claiming the Mars Pathfinder rover was guilty of trespassing. She described herself as a Martian ambassador whose psychic connection to the red planet was being disturbed by metallic vibrations. According to her, the rover's movements disrupted the planet's spiritual frequencies, preventing her from receiving cosmic messages. NASA, being the patient adults in the room, chose not to debate interplanetary property rights with a self-proclaimed psychic. The case was swiftly dismissed, though not before forcing lawyers to write the most unintentionally hilarious legal note in history. The plaintiff lacks standing, as she does not, in fact, live on Mars. The ruling unofficially established what's now jokingly called the extraterrestrial standing doctrine, meaning you can't sue anyone for messing with a planet you don't live on. Davis may have lost in court, but she won the eternal title of most ambitious Martian realtor on Earth. 6. The Starbucks Ice lawsuit. In 2016, a woman from Chicago took on the global coffee empire Starbucks, Not for price gouging, not for poor service, but for too much ice. She filed a $5 million class action lawsuit claiming that a 24-ounce iced drink only contained about 14 ounces of actual coffee once the ice melted. In other words, she argued Starbucks was cheating customers out of 8 ounces of liquid freedom. The judge dismissed the case immediately, stating, "A child would understand that ice displaces liquid. That line alone deserves a Pulitzer for judicial sarcasm." Starbucks even released a statement explaining that the amount of ice is clearly visible before purchase, because, it's ice. But this didn't stop a wave of copycat lawsuits from other hopeful caffeine crusaders. The case became a classic legal benchmark in reasonable consumer expectations, also known as, if you think ice doesn't take up space, maybe you need a refresher course in physics, not a lawyer. 7. The man who sued Anheuser-Busch for false advertising. In 1991, a Michigan man named Richard Overton decided to sue Anheuser-Busch, the makers of Bud Light, for $10,000. His claim? Emotional distress and financial loss caused by beer commercials. You remember those old ads where attractive women appeared whenever someone cracked open a Bud Light? Overton did, and he took them literally. After drinking multiple six-packs with no supermodels materializing, he felt defrauded. He even argued that the company's advertising created unrealistic expectations of success with women. The judge dismissed the case, probably between fits of laughter, but Overton had technically made legal history. His case became the textbook example of why puffery, a legal term for exaggerated marketing, isn't false advertising. In simpler terms, no, you can't sue Coca-Cola because it didn't actually make you smile. Still, Overton's devotion to the cause earns him a toast. The only man in history who took beer commercials so seriously, he tried to cross-examine fantasy. 8. The woman who sued herself for divorce. In what might be the most confusing court filing ever, a woman in California once attempted to sue herself for divorce. The reason? She legally owned multiple identities due to a complex tax scam, and one of her aliases had technically married another. When the IRS started asking questions, she tried to fix the issue through self-litigation, filing as both plaintiff and defendant. The court initially thought it was a prank until she arrived with 2 sets of paperwork and insisted she needed to dissolve the union between her personalities. The judge, clearly regretting law school, had to rule that you cannot file for divorce against yourself, even if your alter ego is emotionally unavailable. The case was dismissed, but it lives on in legal folklore as the world's first, and hopefully last, case of marital self-negotiation. The moral? If you ever start arguing with yourself about alimony, maybe therapy is cheaper than court fees. 9. The man who sued his parents for being born. In 2019, an Indian man named Raphael Samuel made global headlines by filing a lawsuit against his parents for the crime of giving him life without consent. His argument was both philosophical and profoundly ridiculous. He claimed that since he never asked to be born, his parents had violated his human rights by bringing him into a world full of suffering, taxes, and Monday mornings. He demanded financial compensation for his lifelong, unconsented existence. To make matters stranger, he wasn't angry with his parents. In fact, they were both lawyers and found his lawsuit hilarious. They even released a joint statement saying, "We admire our son's boldness." The case never made it to court, but Samuel's interview clips became internet gold. He appeared with a fake beard and sunglasses, saying things like, "If we are born without consent, we should be paid to live." Philosophically, deep? Maybe. Legally insane? Absolutely. He accidentally became the poster child for antinatalism, the belief that life itself is a cosmic scam. Still, if everyone could sue their parents for existing, courtrooms would look like Thanksgiving dinners, full of accusations, guilt trips, and nobody taking responsibility. 10. The woman who sued Disney. Over a haunted house. In 2000, a woman filed a lawsuit against Disneyland, claiming that the Haunted Mansion ride was so terrifying it caused her to suffer emotional trauma. Her story went like this. She boarded the ride expecting a fun, family-friendly experience, but when a ghostly animatronic jumped out, she allegedly screamed, fainted, and suffered permanent psychological damage. She demanded thousands in damages for what she described as gross negligence in guest safety. Disney's lawyers calmly reminded the court that the ride is literally called the Haunted Mansion, not mildly spooky cottage. They even presented park signage reading, "Warning, This attraction contains scary scenes and sudden effects. The judge, suppressing what must have been a heroic laugh, dismissed the case, citing personal responsibility for entertainment choices. Ironically, the case inspired a surge of curiosity about the attraction, turning it into free advertising. To this day, theme park employees still joke that the only truly haunted part of Disneyland is the legal department, forced to defend itself against people who can't handle fake ghosts. In the end, the woman learned a hard truth. When you voluntarily ride a haunted house, you can't sue the ghosts for doing their job. 11. The man who sued the Weather Channel for a bad forecast. In 2012, an Israeli man sued the Weather Channel after a slightly inaccurate forecast ruined his week. The report predicted clear skies, so he went outside without a jacket and promptly got drenched in a rainstorm. He claimed the bad forecast made him sick, caused lost wages from missing work, and led to emotional suffering from the betrayal of trusting meteorologists. His total damages? $1,000 plus an apology from the institution responsible for misleading citizens. The lawsuit became an instant meteorological meme. The court, clearly unimpressed, ruled that weather predictions are forecasts, not guarantees, and dismissed the case faster than a gust of wind. The man's public statement afterward was somehow even better. "I don't blame the rain, but the lies about the rain." His story inspired a short-lived trend of sarcastic online lawsuits, including people jokingly threatening to sue Punxsutawney Phil, the groundhog, for bad spring predictions. It remains one of the most delightfully petty examples of human entitlement. A man who thought Mother Nature herself owed him a refund. Let's be honest, if every wrong forecast led to a lawsuit, meteorologists would need lawyers instead of umbrellas. 12. The man who sued Pepsi for not giving him a fighter jet. In 1999, a college student named John Leonard watched a Pepsi commercial that jokingly advertised a Harrier fighter jet as a prize for 7 million Pepsi points. While most people laughed, John saw opportunity and possibly early onset delusion. He calculated that buying 7 million Pepsi points outright would cost $700,000, and he found investors willing to fund his Pepsi jet plan. He mailed his points and a check to Pepsi, expecting delivery of a $32 million military aircraft. Pepsi replied that the ad was clearly a joke. Leonard disagreed and sued. The case, Leonard v. PepsiCo, became legendary. The court ruled that no reasonable person could expect Pepsi to deliver an actual warplane, though that probably offended Leonard, who clearly considered himself very reasonable. The best part? The original commercial never mentioned the jet as a joke, forcing Pepsi to re-edit it with "just kidding" in giant letters. Leonard lost the case but achieved pop culture immortality. His story was later turned into a Netflix documentary, proving that even if you can't win a fighter jet, you can still win the internet. Moral of the story: always read the fine print, especially when it involves military-grade aviation. 13. The woman who sued McDonald's for being too addictive. Long before the phrase junk food addiction was mainstream, a New York woman named Valerie Jones tried to take McDonald's to court for being too irresistible. In 2002, she filed a class action lawsuit claiming that McDonald's food caused her obesity, diabetes, and uncontrollable cravings. Her lawyers argued the company used psychological manipulation through advertising and addictive ingredients like sugar and fat. The court wasn't exactly loving it. The judge dismissed the case, stating that every reasonable consumer knows burgers and fries are not health food. Jones insisted she'd been tricked into dependency by Ronald McDonald's cheerful smile, which, in fairness, has always looked a little suspicious. While she lost, her lawsuit became the foundation for later debates about fast food regulation and corporate responsibility. But back then, it mostly just made people laugh. One late-night host quipped, "She's suing McDonald's for making her eat McDonald's. Next, someone will sue Netflix for making them binge-watch." Still, the case made one thing clear. In America, if you can't quit something, there's always a lawyer willing to turn your lack of self-control into a potential payday. 14. The woman who sued herself. After a car crash. In 2009, a woman in Pennsylvania named Betty Lou Beets managed to do something no one had ever attempted before. She sued herself. While driving her own car, she lost control, crashed into a utility pole, and suffered significant injuries. Unfortunately for Betty, She was both the driver and the car owner, which meant her insurance policy technically required her to identify the at-fault party. So her lawyer came up with a bold and hilarious legal strategy: sue herself for negligence. That way, her insurance company would be forced to pay out damages. The case actually went to court, where the judge was forced to read the words "Plaintiff, Betty Lou Beets, Defendant, Betty Lou Beets," aloud with a straight face. Ultimately, the judge ruled that self-litigation wasn't a valid way to collect from one's own insurance, but not before this legal paradox became the stuff of law school legend. The insurance company's closing argument summed it up perfectly. You can't blame yourself and expect to get paid for it. Still, Betty's attempt remains a shining example of American ingenuity. When life gives you lemons, apparently you can try to sue yourself for slipping on them. 15. The man who sued the devil. In 1971, a man named Gerald Mayo walked into a U.S. District Court in Pennsylvania and filed what might be the most ambitious lawsuit in history: Mayo versus Satan and his staff. He accused the devil himself of causing misery, temptation, and placing obstacles in his path to success. He even asked the court for a restraining order against Satan. The court clerk, probably fighting back tears of laughter, stamped the case as official and forwarded it to a federal judge who had to respond in writing. The judge ruled that the court could not proceed because it lacked jurisdiction, meaning in simple terms, they had no way to summon the defendant. The plaintiff has failed to provide an address for service, the ruling read. In other words, they couldn't subpoena Satan. Despite being tossed out, the case became a legal cult classic. Law professors still cite it when discussing frivolous filings, and theologians occasionally bring it up in debates about evil and accountability. Gerald never got his restraining order, but he did make history as the only man to formally accuse the devil of workplace harassment, and prove that even hell has better lawyers than most mortals. 16. The guy who sued Apple for turning him gay. In 2019, a Russian man named D. Razumilov filed a lawsuit against Apple, claiming their technology manipulated his sexual orientation. His story was pure courtroom gold. He said he downloaded a cryptocurrency app on his iPhone and accidentally received Gaycoin instead of Bitcoin, along with a message that said, "Don't judge until you try." Taking the message seriously, he began exploring same-sex relationships and later blamed Apple for pushing him toward homosexuality. He demanded 1 million rubles, about $15,000, in damages for moral suffering. Apple's lawyers, understandably stunned, clarified that cryptocurrency transactions were managed by third-party software, not by Siri's matchmaking algorithm. The court quickly dismissed the case, but it became an internet sensation. Memes exploded overnight. Sued Apple, got I gay. The plaintiff insisted the issue wasn't about sexuality, but about digital manipulation, yet few were convinced. Still, his case raised a fascinating philosophical point. If a message from an app can change your entire life, maybe you didn't need a new phone. You needed a new sense of identity. Apple never commented officially, but somewhere in Cupertino, you know someone quietly added a new line to the terms of service. Results may vary. 17. The man who sued his date for ghosting him. In 2017, a Texas man named Brandon Vesmar filed a lawsuit against a woman he met on Tinder for, and this is true, texting during their movie date. He claimed her constant phone use during Guardians of the Galaxy Vol. 2 ruined his cinematic experience and constituted theft of time and emotional resources. He demanded $17 or $31, the exact price of his movie ticket. The woman countered that she'd only sent a few messages to a friend who needed help and called Brandon's legal action absurd harassment. The story exploded online, with local news dubbing him the pettiest man in Texas. Even director James Gunn tweeted about it, calling it the greatest lawsuit in film history. Brandon defended himself, saying it was about principle, not money, but the internet was unconvinced. Eventually, he dropped the case after the woman agreed to reimburse him in cash, probably just to make the whole thing stop. Still, his stunt earned him a strange kind of fame. In a world full of ridiculous lawsuits, he became the man who turned a bad date into a court case, proof that chivalry is dead, but pettiness is alive and billing by the hour. 18. The man who sued God for a natural disaster. In 2005, a Romanian prisoner named Pavel M. decided to file a lawsuit against God himself, accusing the Almighty of breach of contract. According to Pavel, his baptism was a binding spiritual agreement in which God promised protection in exchange for devotion. When Pavel was arrested and sentenced to prison, he felt that divine protection had clearly failed, so he sued. The official complaint, filed in a Romanian court, stated that God did not deliver on his commitments to safeguard the plaintiff from evil. The case was sent to the local Orthodox Church as God's legal representative, but they refused service, saying the Creator doesn't have a registered address. The court dismissed the lawsuit for lack of jurisdiction in celestial matters. Pavel's argument, while absurd, raised an accidental philosophical question. If faith is a contract, who enforces it? Though his case went nowhere, he briefly became a national folk hero, the man who literally took God to court. Somewhere, a judge had to sign a document officially confirming that Romania's judiciary system does not, in fact, have authority over heaven. It's a rare example of bureaucracy meeting theology, and both walking away confused. 19. The man who sued his doctor for making him taller. In 2010, a man from California named Brian Collins underwent elective leg-lengthening surgery to gain a few extra inches in height. The operation was technically successful. He went from 5'6" to 5'9", but instead of newfound confidence, he found chronic pain, a limp, and a sudden hatred for stairs. So, naturally, he sued his doctor for making him too tall. His argument was that he hadn't fully understood the lifestyle complications of being taller. New clothes didn't fit, his old car seat was uncomfortable, and apparently he kept hitting his head on door frames. He accused the surgeon of failing to warn about the consequences of increased verticality. The doctor, trying not to laugh in court, pointed out that the patient had literally signed a consent form titled Cosmetic Height Enhancement. The judge dismissed the case, declaring, "The plaintiff got exactly what he paid for." Moral of the story? Be careful what you wish for, especially if what you wish for is a lawsuit waiting to happen. 20. The man who sued his bank for too much money. In 2013, a French man named Henri Michel accidentally received a $1.2 million bank transfer that wasn't his. Instead of quietly returning it, he spent weeks panicking, then filed a lawsuit against the bank for causing psychological distress by giving him too much money. He argued that the accidental fortune tempted him to sin and destroyed his peace of mind. He even claimed he couldn't sleep because the devil whispered to spend. The bank countered that they fixed the error within days, and that Henri's only stress seemed to come from trying to figure out how fast he could buy a boat. The judge tossed the case, calling it an attempt to profit from clerical temptation. Henri's story quickly became viral, making him a symbol of French overthinking, a man who tried to turn divine luck into damages. 21. The woman who sued an airline for losing her mind. In 2015, a passenger named Linda Parker filed a $500,000 lawsuit against an airline after a flight delay caused her mental breakdown. Her flight from New York to Denver was delayed 6 hours due to bad weather. During that time, she claimed the airline failed to provide emotional support, resulting in a complete psychological unraveling. She described the trauma of feeling trapped in an airport surrounded by overpriced sandwiches and screaming children. Her lawyers called it institutional cruelty through boredom. The airline politely pointed out that weather isn't something they control, unlike seatbelt signs. The case was dismissed, but Linda went viral for demanding a mental health refund from the sky. Some sympathetic travelers even said she wasn't wrong. Airports are emotional torture chambers. Still, suing the airline for Mother Nature's mood swings set a new bar for creative litigation. 22. The man who sued Google for ruining his marriage. In 2014, a Japanese man sued Google Street View, claiming that its cameras captured his wife's car parked outside another man's home, leading him to discover her affair. Instead of thanking Google for the accidental truth bomb, he sued them for emotional trauma and privacy invasion. He demanded $500,000, arguing that the photo's existence destroyed his happiness. The irony? He publicly filed the lawsuit, turning his private humiliation into global news. The court sympathized but dismissed the case, ruling that Google hadn't invaded his privacy, just documented public streets. The man's life unraveled further after his wife left him permanently, citing lack of perspective. The case now sits in legal history as the world's first instance of a man suing technology for being too honest. It's poetic justice. He blamed Google for breaking his marriage, but the truth was always just one click away. 23. The man who sued himself through a mirror. In 2018, an artist from Berlin named Klaus Weber took performance art to a whole new level by filing a legal complaint against his reflection. His claim, his mirrored self, mocked him daily and existed without permission. The stunt, which began as a satire on bureaucracy, became real when a local court was forced to respond. The judge, clearly questioning his career choices, officially ruled that reflections do not hold legal personhood. Klaus used the verdict as part of an art exhibit titled "The Defendant Stares Back." Ironically, the museum where it was displayed later faced its own lawsuit when visitors claimed the mirrors caused vertigo. In the end, Klaus's case proved two things: modern art is indistinguishable from legal absurdity, and Germany's courts have the patience of saints. If you ever feel judged by your reflection, just remember, at least you didn't subpoena it.